Thanks, Renee. Getting all my pieces up here. So welcome, everybody. We are going to do a very quick run through talking about just what is a functional behavior assessment and behavior support plan. And many of you may be well involved with this type of work. So this is just sort of an overview. I think most of us have had some experience with this, but it is good to kind of look at this again. I'm hoping to go over some terms or definitions, the purpose of the FBA, some functions of behavior that often you see, replacement and related skills, which is something that sometimes we skip over, but I think it's a really important piece. And then what about our youth with complex needs? What are some further considerations? So just kind of diving right in, an FBA, just simply defined, is a process used to determine the function of a behavior and what are those factors that maintain it, basically to understand why a behavior occurs, because behaviors occur for a reason. And so understanding what that reason is so important in terms of helping a person learn a new and different type of skills. And that's where your support plan comes in, is that once you understand the function of the behavior, you put together a support or intervention plan that teaches new and more acceptable, what we call replacement skills. And those are the skills that need to serve that same function as the challenging behavior. And they need to help reduce the occurrence or the intensity of the challenging behavior. So I'm going to come back to talking a little bit about replacement skills, but keep that in mind, it's an important piece. So how do we go about doing this? So many of you are familiar with this. This is not going to be a new piece, but we start by looking at the antecedents and the consequences to a well-defined behavior. So we look at what is that behavior, the behavior of concern, and we want to define it in a way that everyone is looking at the same thing. So it's not a tantrum, a meltdown. It really is defining it as something that you can almost see in your head. And then we think about what are those factors that occur prior to that behavior occurring, and those would be antecedents. And there are a lot of things that occur prior to behaviors, right? So we are looking for factors that are associated with the presence of the behavior, sort of themes of what we see frequently. So we look at what happens before, and then we look at what happens afterwards, and that's what we call consequences. And many times we think about consequences that are things that we have planned to occur, but it's very important and probably most important to look at those naturally occurring consequences. So those are the things that we really key in on when we're doing this functional behavior assessment. So examples, let me give you a few examples of commonly noted antecedents behavior consequences. So usually with an FBA, we look at challenging behaviors that are like aggression towards others or self-injurious behavior towards self, property destruction. But I also think sometimes it is helpful, and I like it when people start looking at behaviors where people are maybe shutting down and they're not open to interventions or learning. Those are just as important to be able to explore. What kinds of things should we be looking for in antecedents? It's not, we want to open up our minds and be able to really think about things like the environment, the sounds, the lights, the movements, things like changes and transitions that might be happening at that time. Oftentimes you're going to focus on what kinds of demands or requests are being made of that person. We also, if as part of this, want to think about pain and hunger and that type of thing that might be occurring. And sometimes it's people who might be in the environment. And then afterwards, when looking at the consequence area, we look at oftentimes demands are removed or attention is removed or given or an object or an item is gained. You might gain some personal space. Those are also things that we might see. And sensory experiences, you might either avoid or have access to a sensory experience. So those are things that we want to take into account when we are looking at our antecedents and consequences. So once you do this, there are some frequently identified functions of behavior that you see in the literature that are called out oftentimes. And so these are very simple. But when you boil it down, oftentimes this is where the behavior is sort of springing from, the real function, what it is doing for the person. It's either allowing them to access or avoid attention, access or avoid an activity or a tangible item, or a sensory experience or a sensory condition, either being able to have access to it or escape it. And I know that communication is always or almost always associated with behavior. And so that is almost a given, but it may not be the actual purpose or the function of the behavior. And so the FBA really allows you to get into looking at what is that behavior doing for that person. So let's just take an example of just a few simple examples just to kind of wrap your head around what I went over. One would be, for example, hitting others with your fist. This, you can see it, it's well defined. And as you do your antecedents, one of the things you come across is that when people interpersonal space, person lashes out and hits and people back off. The function, very simply, is escaping from people, avoids people getting close. Going through, what about hitting the side of my head with my fist? It's another hitting activity, but it is maybe very different because the person, when we look at antecedents, is showing us that they want a snack or a toy or a tablet or something. And what we find is, wow, others are trying to offer this food or toy or tablet just to help alleviate that person from hitting themselves. So the function here would be to access something, access that desired item. What about a situation where we notice that someone is screaming and throwing items all at the same time, but the antecedents here are about unfamiliar people in the home, routines changing. That's what we've noticed. And what happens afterwards, we've noted, is that mom may offer that heavy blanket, stays with her, tells her that the schedule is going to change and get back to normal soon. So here we're looking at function to access comfort and safety. And one final one we might see in school or in the home is some loud verbal refusal, strong language, while the person is pushing away the materials, this young person. And we see this in this scenario happening in the classroom or in a home, particularly when math assignments are presented. And so what happens afterwards? Well, can't have that in the classroom, get sent to the office, and at home, it's just too much, it's too disruptive, and the demands are removed and homework is skipped. So in this case, it's another escape function. So these are just real, very simple examples. And there are some tools that are available, like behavior rating scales, checklists, that can kind of help you start to look at this sort of surface functional behavior assessment. And these are some that are listed on your screen, which is in the PowerPoint. This was taken from the Autism Internet module on functional behavior assessment. And so if you want to check into this a little bit more, that is on autisminternetmodules.org and is a free tool that you can use. But you know what? It is not always this simple, is it? I think all of us know that. You're sitting there going, Chris, it's not this simple. And often it is not, especially for our youth with more complex needs. That simple FBA just doesn't explain the whole picture. So youth with multiple disabilities, and those would be those with maybe having experienced trauma, cognitive challenges, communication differences, and more. We need to look deeper. We need to get under the surface of that volcano, because basically what we see is that disruptive behavior that we can't ignore, or that unsafe behavior. And so it may be that we look at it and say it is attention getting, or it is to escape, or it is to gain a tangible or access. But we need to go really deeper than that and start to ask ourselves, why does a person need to escape? Why are they so interested in gaining access? What is it? And in order to do that, we really have to look at what's rumbling underneath that surface of that volcano. What is it that is really causing that person to come to the point of that disruption? And so that's when our FBA goes much deeper. There may be trauma or illness or pain that we don't recognize initially. There are oftentimes sensory sensitivities and needs and communication challenges or cognitive differences. Social competencies oftentimes are an issue. And in many of the cases of our youth with complex needs, we want them to regulate their emotions. We feel that that is something that would be helpful, and it would, but can they? And if they are unable to at that point, that becomes one of those issues that is helping really push that behavior to the surface. So with that in light, let's look at this, let's kind of revisit and look at this very quickly. That what about that case where unfamiliar people are coming in the home and routine changes? Why might our young lady be so concerned with the new people or the change that's happening? Could it be that there had been trauma previously? Could there have been communication challenges in this case and she couldn't express it any other way? Could there have been issues with emotional regulation or maybe sensory needs to be able to calm herself in those situations? So those might be under the surface. What about people entering personal space? My question would be, why are you so protective of your personal space? What is it that happened to you? Is it your sensory issues? Is it a trauma history? Again, is it social competencies? And these are pretty simple, but it gets you to start to thinking about this. What about the young person that is acting out in terms of maybe academic assignments? Why would he want to escape? Well, everybody says, well, nobody wants to do schoolwork, but you know what? That's not exactly true, or it's not the same with everybody. And so I would start asking myself, does he really understand how to approach that assignment? What about the length of the assignment? Is there fear of failing? And I just can't imagine how to deal with failing of that assignment. Or have I experienced ridicule or punishment from failure? All of those things come into play when, yes, it is escape. We know that, but why? And so your behavior support plan really needs to take all of that into account and put in place interventions that are going to help. But it really needs to start with teaching, as it says here, new, more acceptable replacement skills that serve the same function. So if I am escaping by hitting someone, I need to be able to give that person a different way to escape, which is not always comfortable and is not always where we want to go initially, but sometimes that is where, oftentimes that is where we need to start with youth with challenging behaviors. Then we can also look at related skills. And related skills are those skills that are important, that can give a person a better quality of life, but they're not equivalent to the function of that challenging behavior. So if hitting is to escape, I need to give you a different way to escape. But then I also may want to start working with you on how can you wait a little bit longer and not need to escape quickly. So let's go back and look at some of these situations very quickly. Remember our situation with people entering personal space and I start to hit. Function was escape. Maybe a replacement skill could be communicating verbally or with sign language or even a device, if I am not verbal, to say, go away, leave me alone, get out of my space. The related skill would be coping with sharing my space with someone else, if I'm able to do that. And I will tell you, sometimes that's going to take a while. That's not where we begin. Here's another one, hitting the side of my head. That one, it was to access a desired item. Again, communicate my choice verbally or with pictures. And the related skill would be perhaps waiting, learning to wait for a designated time for that item or activity. But first, I have to give you a different way to access it. And then I'm going to teach you how to wait. And then finally, our young man or young person that is really struggling with those assignments. First of all, I'm going to give you a way to acceptably ask to take a break or skip that homework assignment. Again, that may not feel very comfortable, but that is the place to start, to give that person a new skill. And then get down to some related skills of helping them know how to request help and helping them maybe develop better math competencies. And those are skills that are also going to help avoid this type of challenging behavior. So That was an incredibly quick run through, but in summary, your FBA, understand the function of the behavior. What is that behavior doing for that person? What purpose is it serving? The support plan is teaching new skills, both replacement and related, but start with replacement. And for those with challenging behaviors, you want to look below the surface and really look at those issues that may be driving that. I put some resources here that you can check out. Some are OCALI, some are DODD's modules, and there are many more. So thank you for listening, and I'm going to hand it back to you, Renee.